Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 76th anniversary of the Victory Day in Kiangan, one of the most significant victories that changed the tides of history in the Philippines during the Second World War. To begin, here is the message of the PVAO Administrator Under Secretary Ernesto G. Carolina.
Magandang araw sa ating lahat. Today marks the 76th anniversary of Victory Day in Kiangan, Ifugao. We owe this auspicious event to our valiant forebearers, particularly the Igorots and the freedom fighters of the 66th Infantry Regiment that helped pave the way to the eventual surrender of Japanese Imperial Army General Tomoyuki Yamashita, marking the victorious end of the Second World War. The joint forces of the local guerrillas and Filipino and American troops forged a strong offense against the Japanese Imperial Army. Although lacking in firearms and material weapons, the Igorots and the freedom fighters managed to outwit the Japanese Imperial Army by taking advantage of the terrain of the forested and well-entrenched Lagiwan Hill in Kiangan, Ifugao. Following almost a month of bombardment, General Yamashita and his remaining forces were cornered by the imposing combined Igorot fighters and the Allied forces. This led to the eventual capture and surrender of General Yamashita on September 2, 1945 at the old Kiangan Central School. The next day, General Yamashita signed the instrument of surrender before the Allied forces with U.S. Lieutenant General Jonathan Wainwright and other former prisoners of war in attendance at Camp John Hay in Baguio City on September 3, 1945. The heroic exploits of our veterans in Kiangan prove that they never cowered against the enemy forces despite their smaller number and limited resources. They have crushed the much superior Japanese forces through sheer determination and intense desire to regain the country's independence. The valor and unity displayed by our forefathers are the same values we need in these trying times as we continue the fight against an unseen enemy, the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, more than ever, we are called to work together and stay resilient and optimistic during this health crisis. In so doing, we shall rise together and bounce back even higher from this predicament. Before I end, I would like to offer a snappy salute to our veterans who fought unceasingly, without hesitation, without fear, and without respite to secure freedom and end the Second World War. May we all continue to not only remember their effort during the war, but to also emulate their heroism, valor, and love for country. I wish to extend my felicitations and gratitude to the local government of Kiangan, Ifugao, for continuously celebrating the victory of our veterans by commemorating this momentous event. Thank you for helping us keep the legacy of our veterans alive in the memory of our countrymen, especially our youth. After all, it is our patriotic duty to pass on our veterans' heroism to the next generation. Once again, kaya't ko nga pasalamantan amin nga imay, agmayanak ken naimbag nga aldaw, kada kayo amin, Mabuhay ang mga veterano, mabuhay ang mga Pilipino, mabuhay tayong lahat.
To give us a summary of this event, here is the NHCP Executive Director, Restituto Aguilar.
World War II spanned for nearly 4 years, and the clash between the Allied and Axis powers killed millions of people and destroyed billions worth of property. Japanese defense of Luzon included the Shobu, Shimbu, and Kembu groups. Shobu was under Lieutenant General Tomoyuki Yamashita in northern Luzon with 152,000 troops. Shimbu group was under Lieutenant General Shizuo Yokoyama with 80,000 troops in southern Tagalog and Bicol region. And Kembu group under Major General Rikichi Chukada with 30,000 troops occupied Clark Field, Bataan, and Corregidor. Several Japanese soldiers of the Shobu group assigned in northern Luzon, led by General Yamashita, also known as the Tiger of Malaya, refused the order of Japanese Emperor Hirohito to surrender and insisted on continuing the war. The Japanese Shobu group continued to fight against the combined forces of the U.S. 6th Army, 32nd and 37th Divisions, supported by different guerrilla groups primarily coming from the United States Army Forces in the Philippines, Northern Luzon, or USAFIP-NL. With the combined Filipino and American forces advancing towards the Japanese forces, General Yamashita reconstituted his army but was forced to retreat from Manila to the mountains of Ifugao and Cordillera. General Yamashita and his remaining forces were pressured by the unrelenting onslaught of the combined United States Army forces and the Philippine guerrilla unit in Kiangan's forested and once entrenched Nabilagyan Hill. Following almost a month of bombardment, General Yamashita and his troops were eventually cornered and captured by the operatives of the A Company, 11th Infantry, USAFIP-NL in Kiangan, Ifugao. The USAFIP-NL, which captured General Yamashita, consisted of Igorot fighters. On September 2, 1945, World War II ended when General Yamashita was captured. The captured general and his staff were then airlifted from Ifugao to Nueva Vizcaya and motored to Baguio City the next day, where he formally signed the surrender documents before American forces in Camp John Hay on September 3, 1945. The fall of General Yamashita is commemorated every 2nd of September as Victory Day, marking the liberation of the Philippines from the oppressive Japanese rule. On September 2, 1945, World War II ended when General Yamashita was captured. The captured general and his staff were then brought to Nueva Vizcaya, airlifted to Darigayo's Luna La Union, then motored to Baguio the next day, where he formally signed the surrender documents before American forces in Camp John Hay on September 3, 1945. The fall of General Yamashita is commemorated every 2nd of September as Victory Day, marking the liberation of the Philippines from the oppressive Japanese rule.
let us hear the message of the President of the Veterans Federation of the Philippines, Dr. Cesar P. Pobre.
In October 1944, following their land, air, and sea victories in the Pacific, the American forces ceased Leyte. 3 months later, on January 9, 1945, the U.S. Sixth Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Walter Kruger, made landings on Lingayen Gulf to conduct military operations in northern Luzon. The operations were a part of the overall Allied powers strategy to reconquer the Philippines before invading the Japanese homeland. Concentrated in northern Luzon were about 120,000 to 150,000 men. This force constituted the bulk of General Yamashita's Japanese armed forces in the Philippines, which he took directly under his command. Also in northern Luzon was a resistance movement formed and supported by the local people, Ilocanos, Igorots, and other mountaineers who had since been waging a guerrilla warfare against the Japanese. Employing hit-and-run tactics, the guerrillas raided and ambushed the enemy at such places and at such times as they chose. Not only did they bleed him, they fed on him too. The organization to which they belonged was the United States Armed Forces in the Philippines, Northern Luzon, or USep for short. It was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Russell Volkman. As the military operations commenced, General Kruger assumed command of the USep and had it recognized and refitted as a standard U.S. Army Infantry Division with around 20,000 officers and men. However, it did not have all the combat and support services that were necessary as a standard outfit. Attached to it, though, was an American artillery battalion and, on request, could provide air support. And now the officers and men of the USep were all set to carry out their marching orders. They were to find, fix, fight, and finish the enemy on the basis of 1 against 6. But no matter, there in the Cordillera fastnesses, the Filipino freedom fighters fought relentlessly, day and night, for more than 200 days, digging out the enemy yard by yard and constricting steadily his defense perimeter. By August 15, the USep had advanced to within 5 miles of Yamashita's headquarters in the Asian Valley of Kiangan, Ifugao. But just when they were about to deliver the coup de grace, the knockout blow, so to speak, the bell rang and Yamashita was saved. Emperor Hirohito had ordained Japan's surrender, and accordingly, all the fighting forces were ordered to lay down their arms and cease fire. Meanwhile, on 31 August, Lieutenant Macario Albaradillo from the Combat Company of the USep 14th Infantry Regiment succeeded in making contact with the Yamashita headquarters elements. They must have arranged the details of Yamashita's surrender, the when, where, and how, including the need for the USec troops to vacate Kiangan. This was why only the Americans were present when, on September 2, 1945, Yamashita and his staff debouched from their hideouts and briskly walked with the waiting Americans to the vehicles that brought them to the airstrip of Bagabag, Nueva Vizcaya, some 30 kilometers north-southeast. Thus, the USFNL warriors did not have the pleasure of watching the surrender reception of General Yamashita by the Americans on that historic day of September 2. Nevertheless, they were happy and proud that their marching orders were done and their mission accomplished. How they made that possible is a story worth remembering. For days, weeks, and months, in Tangadan, San Fernando, Mayuyao, Tuguegarao, Cervantes, Besang, Lepanto, Mangkayan, Loo Valley, Tukukan, and many other places, the Filipino freedom fighters wrote blood, sweat, and tears. Their story of an honored, unwept, and unsung patriots, until now untold. It is a story that has to be related to our children and to our children's children, for they need to know the story of their forebears so that they may be able to imbue the pride and the consciousness that they are the scions of Filipinos who knew how to love and serve their country.
And that concludes our short virtual commemoration of the 76th anniversary of the Victory Day in Kiangan. I am Felicia Loislania. Thank you very much for joining us. Stay safe, everyone.